Like a lot of people, before I found a job and a career that I loved, I had to spend some time in a career that I didn't love. And I recall very vividly when I was at university, I was convinced, sorry, I was muted there for a second. When I was in university, I was convinced that what I wanted to do was to work in advertising. And I studied communication and journalism. I graduated. I got a job at an advertising agency. I was living in Boston, Massachusetts at that point. And I spent about 2.5 years in that job. And at some point, it kind of wasn't exciting me anymore. And I thought maybe I needed a different job working for a different company, kind of a new horizon of some sort. And I started looking around, and even the process, normally the process of looking for another job kind of would motivate somebody. And it wasn't motivating me. And I realized what I needed was something very, very different. And I think what I decided I needed was something that had more meaning for me. Advertising, public relations, it could be fun, but I just found it lacked meaning. And at the time, I had started reading very extensively about international affairs and diplomacy and US foreign policy. I had actually contemplated at that point going to graduate school to kind of shift my life completely. And that whole thought process, I look back on it now. Part of it was I think I was just bored or unexcited by the job that I was doing. But part of it was this search for professional meaning. And as I started getting into it, I did go to graduate school. I majored in international affairs and got a master's degree and ended up doing a few jobs before I joined our diplomatic service. And,
هلا بشوفه بعثت لك
and I
الريبورت
think
انا.
somebody needs to mute, I think. And
I'm struggling with it, but yeah, yeah,
uh, And that's honestly what got me into diplomacy, and it's what kept me in diplomacy for about 34 years. Because there was times the jobs could be fun, they could be difficult, they could be challenging, but I never felt that they lacked for real meaning for me, that I was involved in the issues of the day, that I was working in the interest of my country, that I was building relationships overseas that had value for my country. And it made all the difference for me. And still, as I think about what I do kind of after my diplomatic career, I find myself thinking about what are the things that make me feel like my labor, my work has
mm,
some kind of substantial meaning.
yeah. And what keeps you today motivated after it seems like you've accomplished a lot? And what's next for you?
So I'm actually struggling with that right now. And I think I have a lot of options. And part of me wonders whether I'll ever find something else that felt as significant as the multiple
Mm,
jobs that I was doing over the past decades for a lot of reasons. They had they had meaning in terms of the value of the work, how I interacted with people, in some cases helped people working as a public servant, but also just the fact that the longer I was in the position as a U.S. diplomat, the teams that I was leading and managing were growing larger, and I decided I really liked that. So in Saudi Arabia, for example, I had a team of almost 1,000 people, and now I find myself like that's probably not an option at this point. So
mm,
I'm taking some time, and I'm taking the advice of a lot of friends and mentors of mine to say, take a deep breath and think about what it is that would give me meaning in my life. And I think part of it is trying to find things that I really couldn't do as a public servant and exploring those now. And that
mm.
includes writing publicly, speaking publicly, getting involved in not-for-profit organizations that are doing good and that I can contribute as a private citizen. So I think this has sort of been my project and will be my project for this summer is to figure out how I can find that meaning in the next
Mm.
phase of my life.
Nice. Let's dive into diplomacy, and we're going to go into just the nitty-gritty. For a lot of people, diplomacy is some are experiencing it, and many others are exploring it. So, just to start, what does a typical day look like for you as a U.S. ambassador to Saudi Arabia? And can you give us a peek into the daily rhythm of your work, your responsibilities?
Roy, one of the real appealing parts of certainly being an ambassador, but also just being a diplomat at any level, really, is that most days there's no pattern. Every day is substantially different. And I never felt, literally, I look back on my time in Saudi Arabia and I look back even on my time years earlier, and I never felt like I was in a rut doing the same thing over and over again. Um, as an ambassador in a big country like Saudi Arabia, you kind of have multiple functions. The one everybody knows is you have this relationship, this official relationship with the government. And so some days I would be meeting with ministers, the leadership of the government, leaders in the military, leaders in the kind of all aspects, whether it's telecommunications or infrastructure, or you name it. And so being the head of that official relationship between the United States and in this case the Saudi government, that was a big piece of it. That's what everyone thinks an ambassador often does.
Mm.
But there's more to it than that. In addition to that public relationship, their private relationship, that government to government piece, there's building a public relationship. And so I spent a great deal of time building relations not just with Saudi officials, but with the Saudi people. And we would do outreach on social media, in the mainstream media. We would do outreach by bringing American speakers, by visiting schools and universities, essentially by traveling around the country and meeting folks from all walks of life. So that in addition to the official US to Saudi relationship, there was this sense that American people were interacting with Saudi people. That's hard only because it's a big country. How do you feel like you're touching everybody? Engaging with social media is actually a great blessing in that sense because you can reach larger numbers of people, often in the language that they speak, on the media that they get information from. And so that was also a part of my life, and that could be on any day. I also spent a lot of time on what we call commercial diplomacy. So a lot of American companies do business in all over the Middle East, certainly, but in
Mm.
Saudi, it was a big market for us. There's companies that were long established. There were companies that are new to the market and want to explore it. And so a piece of my role is helping them succeed in the Saudi market. And of course,
Yeah.
there's a big presidential visit coming up next week, and the US president is bringing with him a huge delegation of American business people. So that's a
Mm.
fundamental part of what an American diplomat does, what any diplomat does for their country. And in Saudi, that was a big piece of my job. And the
Mm.
last sort of quarter, if I divided my brain into four pieces, was we had a lot of American citizens, have a lot of American citizens living overseas. A lot of them, there's probably 80 or 90,000 of them living in the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia. And a part of my job, a legal part of my job, is looking after their well-being. If they get into
Yeah.
trouble, if they need help, if they need advice. And so, of all of those things, that in some sense, although it's not the one that took the most amount of my time,
Mm.
it's in some ways the most important piece. And so all of those different things, kind of on a given day, I'm doing different pieces of those. And that's the beauty of the job is because no 2 days are identical.